I understood that music couldn't only make you feel good, I also understood that music could make you feel bad. So Adam Neely, who's an amazing presenter of music theory, did this YouTube video called A is 432 Hertz. And in that video, he examines the popular New Age claim that it's better to tune your instruments down to 432 than the now standard 440 Hertz tuning. And he basically thinks that tuning down to 432 is ridiculous New Age crap. So I'm like a double Aquarius and I don't care about any of that, I tell you. And I wanted to do this response because I think that he's approaching this issue in the wrong way. So he starts his video out with several ways of taking the piss out of New Agers, which is actually quite funny to see, who claim that 432 is better.
We have a deep connection to this tuning because it more accurately reflects the vibrational frequencies in the universe around us.
Tuning in 432 gives better looking math, which of course is ridiculous. It doesn't denote some kind of underlying sacred geometry. There is no universal truth about better looking math.
Well, hold on there. I just found this table on the internet that proves it. 432 has better looking math. Look at this math right here. This math is so much better than this math. This is uglier math.
And then he goes on to examine why Pythagorean tuning sucks and why we are not tuning in Pythagorean way anymore. So it is true, there are a lot of bogus claims about this out
Check it out. This is technically Pythagorean tuning in 432 Hertz.
And then he also says that as humans, unless we have absolute pitch or perfect pitch, we don't actually respond to the absolute frequency, but rather to the ratio between the frequencies.
Unless you are one of the rare people with perfect pitch, you do not perceive absolute frequencies.
And then he basically takes us on a guided tour of the history of tuning standards. And he explains why not only is everything relative, but everything is also rather arbitrary.
The 18th and 19th centuries brought an arms race among orchestras to see who could tune the highest.
Now, all this is good and well, but I think that he's completely missing the point with all of that. And I have to preface this with saying that I really respect him as a musician and as a presenter of music theory, and I think that he's probably forgotten more about music theory than I will ever learn. So there is absolutely no dissing his competence. I think he's amazing, but why do I think he's wrong in this particular case? So for me, it's like this. Music and sound come first, and music theory comes second, and it's a way to explain musical movements mostly. And the other thing is that it's especially applicable to Western-based music. And I think that the way we approach this question of 432 versus 440 should not be based on music theory, but it should be based on music itself, the way we experience music and the way that it impacts our consciousness. So I think that even Adam Neely would admit that he's not into music theory because music theory is so great, although it is great and it is interesting, but because music is great. And why are people into music? Well, they're into music because it affects them on a pre-verbal, pre-analytical, on a visceral, emotional level. That's why people are into music. We listen to music because it resonates with our consciousness or because it transforms our consciousness. And the question is not if 432 is coherent with any kind of music theory or scientific theory. The question is, how does 432 affect our consciousness? And is it any different from 440? And I think that Adam Neely's approach to debunk that question on scientific terms or music theoretical terms is just misguided for that very reason. If a frequency affects people in a certain way, then why not believe them? You know, if a person says this frequency, this note, this tone makes me feel a certain way, then why not believe them? What's wrong with that? Why not take them serious? Music is subjective. For example, when I first listened to the Pet Shop Boys many, many years ago, I understood that music couldn't only make you feel good, I also understood that music could make you feel bad. Music could generate all kinds of emotions. You were always on my mind. And as a consequence, I never listened to the Pet Shop Boys because I don't want to feel bad. But at the same time, I'm perfectly willing to admit that this music resonates with other people, that it makes other people feel good. And that's not an objective thing. Or take Slayer, for example, this heavy metal band that friends of my youth used to be into. Now, I think that's terrible stuff. Terrible, terrible music. But who am I to discount the opinions of people that are into it? Subjective experience is what matters in music, even if we can't make good sense of it in terms of music theory. Now, having said that, it has been proven that 432 has an effect on consciousness in the sense that it promotes sleep. It makes you sleepy, it makes you drowsy. And I've linked to that research below. And we could deduce from that it has a calming effect, and I experienced this also. But my point is, sound can be and is also used in many, many different ways. And one of them is improving relaxation, which the frequency of the 432 seems to do. So there are other frequencies that have other effects on consciousness. For example, if you tune much, much higher than 440, the music will start to sound jarring to you. And traditional music theory has no grasp of this because it's not what it's about. It has no grasp of how certain frequencies resonate with certain centers in the body.
It will open your chakras. It will open your third eye.
Please.
These things are not the domain of music theory. They're the domain of sound healing, yoga, meditation. In other words, spiritual practice. And I think that's a related point that I wanted to make. Tuning to 432 makes sense if you're into a particular kind of music. That is music that has the object to transform consciousness, and that's a very specific type of music, because most types of music are not there to transform your consciousness. Most of them are just to resonate with a certain emotional state. So in other music, I'm not even sure that it makes sense. So frequencies and their effects on consciousness are not often part of scientific study because there is a lot of variation. And you know, you can't do like a double blind. I just go to say for 32. Double blind scientific experiment to prove that this or that frequency universally has that effect on humans everywhere across all possible worlds. It just doesn't work that way. But it doesn't mean that it's not valuable to consider the question of 432 versus 440. It is a valuable question. So when I chant mantras, for example, and I do this often in the morning, very early in the morning, I often tune my guitar down to 432. To find that it makes me sleepy, it makes me drowsy. So I can feel the effect of 432 and how it is more calming. But if I don't want to fall asleep in the morning, then I won't tune my guitar to 432. It's just not the right thing to do. And I agree with Adam Neely that tuning down to 432 is not the solution to all of our planetary problems. But I would submit that our planetary problems, the root of that is a problem of consciousness, and sound can influence consciousness. So I think that's where the whole debate comes from. Of course, it doesn't mean that if you tune down to 432, suddenly we're going to have peace on earth. But what you can say is that when you work with frequency, and in spiritual work we always work with frequency, whether it is in terms of light or whether it is in terms of sound, it's an experiment. You take your own mind-body system and you experiment. You gain experience of how it makes you feel. And that's a complete spiritual path in itself. You know, you can become enlightened simply by means of sound. And it starts with this. How does a certain sound make you feel? How does it modulate your consciousness? And then from that experience, you can use that sound again to modulate your consciousness again and again and again and again. From gaining knowledge in that way, you gain mastery over your thoughts, your energy, and your emotions. So it's not that Adam Neely's arguments are wrong. They're not wrong. It's not your fault. It's just when you talk about the effect of frequency on consciousness, it doesn't make sense to talk about music theory. It makes sense to talk about consciousness. So it's just missing the point. When we talk about frequency and how it affects us, we should talk about consciousness, not music theory. It's like playing a different language game. And they're two different language games that can't really be understood in terms of each other. So my challenge to Adam Neely would be to get out of his music theory framework and reconnect to what it was that originally so impacted him, so inspired him about music, and how it made him feel, and how did it transform his consciousness, and then talk about that, instead of all that music theory stuff. How did it matter to you, Adam Neely? And I mean that. I would love to hear him talk about that. And after that, he may still think that it's nonsense to tune your instrument to 432, but perhaps he'll also be more understanding of other approaches. It's like, admit that Western music theory doesn't have the monopoly on sound. There are other ways to approach sound that are equally valid. They're like for individuals and for individual practices. And they don't really lend themselves to be understood in terms of music theory. I think when it comes to frequency and consciousness, there's a large role that our imagination plays in that process, because imagination is really the key in shaping our experience. And it's the same with smelling or tasting, and it's not a bad or unobjective thing, It's just something how we're wired, and there is no problem with that. But it's good to realize that when you talk about these kinds of debates. So far my response to Adam Neely, this about wraps it up. If you like this video, please subscribe below and share it with your friends, family, total strangers. And see you next time.